I'm Jenny Priestley, TVB Europe's Content Director, and today I'm joined by the DPP founder and CCO Mark Harrison and CEO Rowan de Pomerai. Hi, both.
Hello there. Hi.
So we're talking because DPP is celebrating its 10th anniversary. Now, Mark, when DPP launched, you obviously were the founder and the CEO. What was its purpose back in 2015?
Its purpose then was to try and hasten the progress towards end-to-end digital production, particularly in the UK, because at that time we were just UK based. And it actually come out of a few years of work in which we'd been exploring that on an informal basis initially, which had culminated in the definition of a file delivery specification, which enabled broadcasters to remove tape from the delivery part of the process. But that had been a big change initiative that had gone really, really well. And what we'd found in doing that was that it was possible to bring different parts of the media supply chain together to work collaboratively. And it was really that kind of spirit that people felt they wanted to see sort of continue in the long term. That's what led to the foundation of the DPP as a company in 2015.
And how has that changed over the past 10 years?
It's changed actually in some respects quite a lot, and in some respects not at all. So the bit that's not changed at all is that the DPP is still all about bringing together different parts of the supply chain for peer-to-peer engagement, to build connections and relationships, and for people to gain insight through exchanging with each other in created engagements that are created by us. So that's still the same. What's different is that it's now very much an international organization. So it's got a much greater breadth of involvement from a much greater range of companies.
Cool. Okay. And Rowan, you joined as CTO in 2018. From your point of view, how has the DPP evolved to help its members since then?
Yeah, I mean, as Mark says, it's kind of been a continual evolution, and I think what we found is that the DPP has always sat at that moment of transformation and change in technology and where technology meets the business of media. So some of the ways that it's changed have really been the types of conversations we've been having. Those transformations going on in the industry have been different. They've been much more international. They've been much more about the ways that content providers reach their audiences, all the while moving some of their infrastructure to the cloud and things like that. So that's meant that the types of conversations we're having are different, and often they've been much more about the technology strategy conversations, whereas those very early days, there was quite a big implementation piece around file-based delivery. So I'd say that's been the biggest change I've seen. But it's very much a continuation of that sort of same theme about the big changes that are mattering to media companies.
And now you stepped up as CEO.
Mm-hmm.
How has that been for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, again, a little bit sort of everything's different and everything's the same because we're the same leadership team. There's three of us that are on the exec of the company, and we set our agenda in very much the same way, very collaboratively between us. Of course, what it means now is that Mark's able to focus really on the content and the direction that that's going, and I'm taking on more of how we look after the rest of the company. So, it has been a change, but at the same time, we've always worked very, very closely together. That's been a journey we've been on ever since I joined, and it's still the case. So, similarly, you see that reflected in what the DPP is doing and where our strategy is. We've not had some big pivot because it was us as a group setting the strategy before, and it still is. It continues to evolve.
So, if I was to ask you to gaze into your crystal balls and we were to speak again in another decade, gosh, we'd be getting older. What would be happening with the DPP and how would it have developed further? Or would you like it to have developed further?
What would be fantastic would be if in a decade's time, the DPP was still regarded by every company that worked in media as being the place to find the best insight and the best relationships and to form the strongest networks in the industry. So to have achieved that, we will have to have stayed relevant for another 10 years. And I think maybe the thing that we're most proud of over this time is, as Rowan has just said, we've never done like a huge single pivot. But what we have done is we have gradually evolved over time. We've responded to the way the industry has been changing, and try to ensure that we are always relevant, helpful, useful to whatever state the industry is in. I've often said to people that what's important about us is we're not defensive. It's like if things change, we don't protest about it. We go with it, and we look at what that change means. So, however the industry might have changed in another 10 years, I just hope that we'll still have that relevance.
Yeah, we're definitely going to see that kind of makeup of the industry continue to evolve. We're seeing new types of players in the industry, both content companies and suppliers, and so I think that there will be different types of company involved, and I think there'll be different topics we're addressing. But that really is kind of reflecting that change of the industry as a whole.
So, for any company that isn't currently a member of the DPP, what's your message to them to encourage them to join?
Well, I mean, the way that we like to communicate it is that we provide the insight and connections that member companies need to do business better. And I do think those two lenses of the insight that we're able to provide, the understanding of the industry, whether that's seeing what your peers are doing and how you fit into that broader industry if you're a content company, or really deeply understanding your customers if you're a vendor. And then connections, Mark's talked about the network that we've built and the community that comes together. So those two things are really the things for me that anchor what we try and do. And then different types of companies will get different benefits out of it, but everything really stems from that.
So, Mark, when you set up the DPP 10 years ago, I mean, the broadcast or the content industry was completely different to where it is now. We had the streamers; they were kind of around, but they weren't the all-encompassing, all eating everything that they are now. What would you say has been the biggest challenge for the media industry over the last decade? And is the industry still facing those same challenges today?
Well, that's a really great question. So I think that the biggest challenge has been how content companies have gone on adapting to changes in consumer behavior, because obviously, we've shifted from a place 20 years ago where we were a supply-led industry. Essentially, broadcasters created content when they wanted to, and they put it out when they were ready. And that was already changing 10 years ago when we started. But of course, it's now changed even more dramatically to a place where it's demand-led. Really, the consumer sets the agenda. So the biggest challenge has been for any organization is how you go on responding as those things keep changing. And those changes have never been linear. And every time we think they are, so like, there was I'd say 10 years ago, it seemed like, yes, it was all going to be about streaming and probably about global streamers, and they would blow away, smaller broadcasters, and that would be that. There'd be like 5 or 6 global streamers by 2025, and the story would be over. And of course, that's not the case at all. In fact, the picture's just become more and more complicated and more interesting with more and more different content suppliers. So yeah, I think that's one of the key things that we always try and kind of project. When we're looking at insight and predictions of what's going to happen in the future, is that one thing you can be certain about is that any change that's happening right now will never continue in a linear way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. And Rowan?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the challenges do continue to evolve. Maybe one of the bigger trends we've seen is that we've been talking, I think, for the entirety of the DPP's existence about achieving technical agility, and the ability to kind of adapt and transform over time. And I think that's become much more of a fundamental business conversation now, as we've seen some of those changes that Mark was just talking about, as we've seen the distribution landscape in particular fragment more and more, and even the biggest companies perhaps being not entirely sure about what the future is going to hold. That sort of willingness to be constantly changing at a faster rate, I think, has really kind of expanded from just being a technical conversation to actually a fundamental business conversation. And I suspect that could be here to stay. I think that there will be that ongoing continual shift for quite some time.
So the three of us are talking prior to NAB show. What are you both expecting to be the biggest talking points in Las Vegas this year?
Well, maybe I should take this one because I'll be going for the DPP. So I think that we've seen a general shift towards thinking about really practical applications of AI, where we were hearing a year ago about AI in everything. I'm hearing much, much less sort of willingness to talk about AI for its own sake. As we put it in our predictions at the start of the year, we're falling out of romance with AI and really kind of lasering in on the very practical applications. So I think that's one. I think we see in the content program there's been quite a lot around the creator economy, and this is a lot of the change that we're just talking about is new content creators and what that means. We've seen more crossover recently between established media players and newer creators, so I think there'll be focus on that. But as ever with a show that big, it's 1,000 different conversations, 1,000,000 different conversations, and usually we find there's some unexpected things that come out. So I, for one, am looking forward to our colleague David's report. He goes to actually report on what we're seeing at the show in terms of some of the big demands that customers have. So while I'll be out there having meetings, he'll be really analysing it, and I look forward to his analysis as much as anybody else.
Yeah, and not to put you on the spot, but do you think those same sort of topics will be what we'll all be talking about at IBC in September?
Yeah, I think so. I think maybe a bit of a sort of tweak on that would be that not necessarily on the booths in the halls, but certainly at dinner afterwards or in the bar, there could be more conversation about kind of geopolitical considerations. I think Europeans are especially focused on that. Their relationships with global suppliers versus regional ones within Europe. So yeah, I'm sure that will get some discussion at NAB too. But I think that we've just come back from running our annual conference in Europe, and that was very high on the agenda for European broadcasters.
Yes, I would imagine that will be something we will be talking about at NAB while we're all there. And then just finally, guys, in terms of the rest of 2025, what has the DPP got planned?
Well, a pretty packed calendar as we usually have. So, of course, we're at NAB, and we'll be hosting drinks there and seeing lots of our member companies. We've then got our New York conference in June, the Media Supply Festival. And really the program's coming together thinking about the end-to-end content supply chain, really from like inception of ideas and content creation through to delivery to consumer. I think too often in our industry, when we talk about the supply chain, we focus on some little bits of it. So we're going to be really trying to broaden our horizons there. And then we're into a report in the summer called Cloud Native Production. So we're going to be looking at especially live production in the cloud. And then the back half of the year leads to our flagship conference. That's yours, Mark? Maybe?
Yeah, via IBC, of course. Mustn't forget that. Where we have our Espresso Summit. Yes, and then of course IBC itself and other events around that. Before, as Rowan says, we get into our kind of flagship conference, the Leaders Briefing, which takes place in November, and we're just about to announce more details about that soon.
Fantastic. Well, we look forward to hearing all about it. Well, Rowan, I wish you safe travels to Vegas. Mark, I look forward to seeing you in Amsterdam. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. So, Mark and Rowan, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me. And hopefully, we'll talk again soon.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Jenny.